Okay, guys, I've been showing you some of the best speakers in the world, no question about it. But what really makes the best speaker of the world? What are the criteria? Obviously, if you're just going by subjective opinions, you're going to get 1,000 different best of the worlds because that's a limited metric. And of course, depending on where someone is in their journey, you're always going to have what their experience is with other things to be their best. I'm fortunate enough to hear it all, and I've featured for you things I think are the best, but this one is definitely a contender and actually the one I've chosen for my room. And in this video, I'm not going to do a normal review. I've already given you actually music clips at my listening position, measurements at my listening position. As a brand, I've shown you testimonials from others. I've shown you at shows how this has gotten people don't get out of their seat, tears in their eyes, goosebumps, all some specs, whether it's efficiency, amazing efficiency, what you can drive this with, all the normal criteria, this checks the box. But what I wanted to go into a deeper dive is what really makes all of these different type speakers, this is electrostatic, but all the other ones too, break it down in a little more detail based on my experience, why this is one of the best speakers in the world and why it resonates so much with me and many others in such a short time frame. And I think this will be a little different flavor of your normal subjective or 100% objective review. So enjoy, guys. Okay, guys, welcome back to the channel. Whenever you talk about best speaker in the world, you're going to get lots of polarizing opinions, and you'll have people adamant that this one is, this one, or that one. And let's get some things out of the way first. Number one, there's no perfect speaker, so let's get that totally out of the way. Number two, there's no best speaker for everybody. And I know in my journey, 40 years being in the hobby, I've had what I thought at any one point in time was my best speaker, the best speaker for me. I've had pistonic drivers, BBC style speakers, planers, horns, electrostatics, all different types at different points in my journey. And what I have learned is that since all cannot be, and there's no one that's perfect, all will be a set of compromises and how you manage trade-offs. And I just addressed this when I featured the Neumann speaker, the budget speaker. That's when you're at a lower budget, you have to make a ton of trade-offs. And that's what's important to see what manufacturers can deliver the best possible performance at various price points and navigate, even at the cost no object level, still some trade-offs. And so that's preface for what I'm going to outline today, a speaker that I found, at least for now, and what I can envision for a distant future is my best speaker for me, based on all the things that I hear, based on all my experience over the years. And it has to do with these, the Popori Vitorlas. And this is just a prototype. I actually got this back to March of this year. This was the first speaker of its type made. Popori's been in business for a while, but I mean, this is the first of this style. And let me give you the background first of all, because the other part of best, and I'm going to get into specifics and even measurements and subjective talking, but as I've said many times on this channel, when I quote review something, normally I only review stuff that I own and use myself, but also one of the highest considerations is going to be the people behind the brand. Not only their acumen and experience and technical abilities, but the quality of people behind it. And so that's something that there's tons of good brands in that ilk, but there's some of them that may have a good product, but I'm not a big fan of the people, and vice versa. So it has to have everything for me to consider putting anything in my room and me endorsing, much less putting my money behind it. So to that end, I had to get comfortable with the company of Popori in general. So let me give you the little background of how I even learned about Popori. It all started several years ago. I think it was the very first or second Seattle Audio Fest. And I was going through the halls. I had just come out of the Acora room, and Dr. Vinyl caught me in the hall. He says, "You got to hear these." And it was a Popori room. And so I went into that room, and they were playing, ironically, the same song, I think it was Ratchet, that I had just heard in the Akora rooms, which Akora is great at huge dynamics, loud volumes, effortless, no distortion, and very impressive. I went into the Popori room, and my experience heretofore with electrostatics is that, yeah, they have a beautiful mid-range quads. Quads are what, 50 plus years old? They're one of the few speakers made over 50 years ago that people will still lust after today. So keep that in your memory bank as I get into more of the technical talk. You can't find Pistonic speakers made 50 years ago that people are even into, because electrostatic drivers are so good at so many things. But one of the main things they're not so good at least traditionally speaking, until I found these, was dynamics and bass. There was always a compromise there and a trade-off that was a little bit too much for many people. Or companies have kind of created hybrids, and that creates its own set of issues that I'll touch on a little bit later. But anyway, I went into the room with the Popori, and ironically, they weren't afraid to play. In fact, they chose the song. They chose the same song the Akoras were playing. And literally, I was blown away. I was not expecting the SPLs they were getting. It was a little bit smaller room, but I was not expecting what I heard, and I came out super impressed. And really, at the price point that they had for those, it was incredible. And I was like, I don't even know if I wouldn't choose those, because it's a line source, had so many things I liked, naturally speaking, if I would choose those over the Akoras. And I was like, I got to keep this in the back of my head. However, as luck unfortunately has it, I forget about things because I go so many shows. I kind of lost touch of that over the years. However, if you were following me last year, 2024, I was going to shows and had reignited my love for electrostatics. I had them in the past, Martin Logan's, but as I was telling you, they have to have a compromise, some of them, in terms of curving the panel, and then also what I didn't like was the bass driver at the bottom. Two problems I had with the Martin Logan's I had. As soon as your head got above the panel, the sound just, was not good at all. It wasn't linear at all. But the biggest problem I've found with many hybrids is that, yes, the electrostatic panel handles most of it, and it's great, but they all roll off somewhere around 200 hertz or even higher sometimes. And that brings the entire sound stage down, because you start to be able to locate frequencies well above, just above 100 hertz. So when the bass driver on the floor, and this applies to Pistonic driver speakers too, it's not just hybrid electrostatics. When you have bass drivers on the ground and they're crossed over high, you will notice, and I have shown this before and told you about this before with my Wisdom Adrenalines, which I've since sold. I was able to change the crossover point of the sub-modules on the ground, and then the panels that were planar, not electrostatic. I was able to move the soundstage up and down based on what I rolled off the bass module at. And that's what taught me and got me more addicted to, for my preferences, not having bass drivers on the ground that have high crossover points where it will reduce the soundstage, make you think, especially with male vocals that hit that frequency range much more, kind of make you listen to midgets and kind of condense things. Line sources and ones that don't have that hybrid or high crossover point, it's much more natural floor to ceiling soundscape. Even bookshelves like these will actually image better. People will find these image better, and it's often easier to design these kind of speakers too, because they don't have a bass driver on the floor. And so it doesn't require line sources to get floor to ceiling images. You can get great sound staging. It's in fact arguably better with smaller bookshelves, and like the Neumanns I have, but you're going to be low frequency compromised. What I wanted to have, my experience with Martin Logan, is that everything is great. I love quads as well. The driver technology of electrostatics is just almost unparalleled, because it's the thickness of a hair. And it's just so light and can move without as much cone breakup. One of the problems with cones speakers is that, this has a grill on it, but you can imagine the cones here. They do not move linearly. They're cones, so they are shaped one way going this way and shaped a different way going back. So the linear excursion is not as nice as something that's exactly the same. And it's not as light. And it doesn't have a magnet structure behind it like these do. And we even talked about this with the von Schweikers. They have an underhung mid-range in one of their speakers because they're trying to get rid of, you know, the magnet structure behind it and all the deleterious effects. There's so many things with cone driver speakers and cabinets, we haven't even talked about that yet, that you have to overcome trade-offs. And like I've shown you, there are speakers that are doing, makers that are doing a phenomenal job, like von Schweikert, Estalon, Acora, YG, the list goes on, that are doing a great job of mitigating all those trade-offs. And that's why those speakers are still qualifying for best in the world for certain people. But in terms of driver technology, lightness, thinness, the ability to move and react linearly, you really can't beat an electrostatic driver. It just, and that's why, still to this day, people lust after quads. Now, is there a trade-off? Of course, like I said, there's no perfect speaker, or else everybody would make electrostatics. On top of the bass excursion issue, if you're using one driver for everything, well then, it's hard for that one driver to be perfectly linear at every frequency. So that's why people have done the compromise of, you know, a mid-range and a tweeter here, or maybe a big bass driver, and they get different types of materials, different types of drivers to be the best in those frequency ranges, and then they use a passive crossover to kind of meld them all together. And again, there's so many speakers. In fact, my GR research in extremes is done by a competent designer, Danny Ritchie. He's got there's 16 drivers in there and an MTM, which is not easy. Let me just tell you, when you see an MTM, if it's done by a not competent person, there's almost 100% chance that's not going to sound good. An MTM is a tough one to integrate properly, and you have to have a proper person knowing how to integrate it, get the right crossover. But it's a minefield. But it's a set of trade-offs that some people do really well. The best thing for me, though, over the long haul, you cannot beat electrostatic driver technology in the mid-range. And because it's so light and one driver type, not a bunch of overlapping drivers. Let's remember, even though a tweeter is set for certain frequencies, mid-range and woofer, they are all overlapping. And when I look at measurements, I don't just look at the top line of how they meld. I look at how much they're overlapping, because you will hear that. And there's other measurements that you can also take to indicate what you're hearing, which I don't like a lot of times, is a tweeter playing the same frequency as a mid-range from two different locations, sometimes very different locations on a cabinet. It can be problematic for me. It loses coherence. One driver doing it all, super coherent. And from the same launch point, super coherent. Another thing that's very important to me. Then the other thing that these mega dollar speakers do a great job on, again, trade-offs, cabinet. You have to make a great cabinet if you're going to go with this style design. And like I've shown you, von Schweikert, YG, Acora, Estalon, just in the last couple of weeks I've shown you these. These are companies doing the best quality cabinets possible because it's so important. If you don't, then you're going to have compromises. You're going to hear the drivers in terms of certain reflections. You're going to hear resonances. It's going to be problematic on top of reliability. It's not going to be secure for some of the violent environment here. And then on top of that, what kind of crossover parts you're going to use. Most of these speakers have big crossovers, sometimes elaborate crossovers, which sometimes fool people. They see these massive parts and tens of parts on a board and think that that's good. It's actually, in most cases, even if they're high quality parts, a bad sign if you see tons of parts in the crossover. Why? Well, that probably tells you that the drivers they selected to meld together, and they're going to be at different points even if they do meld them together and different types of material. But on top of that, if they didn't pick the right ones that synergize together, they need to do a lot with the crossover with different parts to get them to behave well together. So that's another thing that I've picked up over the years, is that I don't get wowed by a super big crossover, fancy parts. I actually look for something with no crossover parts. The best crossover parts are zero. And one of the subjective things right off the bat with this speaker, no question, almost any song you play, if whatever your favorite song is, you can play them on here and compare it to whatever you've been historically listening to. Odds are very good, if not 100%, that you will hear details in that song you've never heard before. Maybe unless you've used electrostatic, really good headphones, you probably heard it. But in terms of a floor standing system, there is probably no more detailed and accurate and just revealing speaker than these. But sometimes that comes with problems if people put a super revealing tweeter and then the rest of it isn't harmonized. Well, with this speaker being one driver for everything, you get all that transparency and detail, but you also keep the coherency. It's not like a bright beryllium tweeter matched with other drivers that don't really share those same attributes, and you end up, I remember at one time, Dynaudio had the Esitar tweeter, and that was kind of universally thought of as the best tweeter at that time, maybe about 20 years ago. And still to this day, you know, Dynaudio makes great tweeters and designs. But now you have plasma tweeters, diamond tweeters, beryllium, all kinds of contenders for best tweeter. But that tells you very little. It's how they integrate them. And so many companies back in that day would just slap a Dynaudio Esitar tweeter in a box, put any other drivers with it, and then try to sell it. And they would sell because the Dynaudio sounded so good at the top end with detail and stuff, but the rest of it fell apart. As you listened longer and longer, you realized it really was just all tweeter or just not a coherent speaker overall. And so again, it's when you have a design that's one speaker driver, one type, no parts, no cabinet to resonate for the most part, then you're so far ahead of the game. And you're dealing with technology that still to this day, people lust after electrostatic designs like the quads. Let's get back to the trade-offs though. Movement was always the bugaboo. You need excursion to create bass, okay? It's just a physics thing. And you couldn't, you know, with a lot of these designs, you had to basically have like sound labs, huge panels, impractical, and they also added their own set of problems, more reflections and curvatures sprayed it around. There were a lot of trade-offs of the bigger electrostatics on top of needing a lot of power, and that caused a lot of issues as well. And so that was always a big bugaboo. What could you do to alleviate the trade-offs of electrostatics? And then when you don't have a cabinet, what are the trade-offs of that? There's no free lunch, like I said, and no perfection. One thing about open baffles, especially line sources, whether it's Maggies, when planars, electrostatics, whatever, even pistonic ones, you will tend to not get as good a measurements at your listening position in your room in the mid-range, although what you get is a little bit more reliable of an anomaly, where the backwall reflections, because it's going to have more backwall reflections than this, a point source will direct the sound to you better. And in general, if you create a true point source speaker, like the Source Points by Andrew Jones, it will measure extremely good at the listening position in a gated fashion, you know, not taking into a lot of reflections. It will measure quite good and be an excellent speaker. Nothing wrong with it. In fact, one of the best speakers you can get for the money. So that is one thing that point source box speakers will be superior at. Natively speaking, they may measure better and flatter and linear, more linear at your listening position. However, the backwall reflection, as long as you deal with open baffles like that, you may get still a little bit tilted up mid-range. However, what you will find, especially with these flat panel ones like these, they almost radiate nothing, especially a line source, towards your ceiling and floor. And that removes some very deleterious reflections that if you look at an impulse response, not just frequency response, if you look at an impulse response at the listening position in a room, those can be more problematic than a little bit more exaggerated mid-range because of a back wave and some less linear frequency responses at the listening position. So again, it takes, I think Andrew Jones is really good at measurements, using measurements, but more importantly, how to take the measurements, what measurements to use, and then interpreting them. So just looking at a frequency response alone at the listening position, a point source box speaker will do an excellent job. Why doesn't everybody do that? Why do some people fall in love with these, even though it might have a little bit exaggerated mid-range from a backwall reflection? Well, it also doesn't have what sometimes these have, sidewall reflections. I've shown with the model WR2, Doug put this in next to a glass wall, sliding glass door. Had almost no reflections from that. Ceiling and floor, you eliminate those from, very common with box style speaker designs. You eliminate that, you end up creating, again, a net positive. It's all about navigating these trade-offs. And again, some of these speakers, they'll do a good job with waveguides and make the controlled directivity to offset sidewall, ceiling, and floor. It's all about how good people choose what design they're doing and then navigate the trade-offs. I just like these because it starts with very limited trade-offs that are very easy to overcome, especially when you're like myself and have no fear of both measurements, taking measurements in my ear at my listening position and getting accurate ones that are flat 20 hertz all the way to 20,000 hertz or more. And I have no fear of doing DSP to correct it, especially when it's so easily audible and measurable what the improvement is. And when you have just a tilted up mid-range, maybe from a back wall reflection from open baffles that you don't get with these, it's so easy to correct that, because in most cases, the reflection and whatnot is basically adding a little bit of mid-range energy that you don't have normally, and attenuating with DSP is very easy to do. So again, is any speaker perfect? No, but why I like these is the one trade-off, or the very few trade-offs that you have to deal with, is very easy to mitigate in room, and it doesn't even guarantee that existing type speakers like this don't have worse, especially if they don't have drivers that match together, the crossover isn't done well, the cabinet isn't done well. You know, you can go through 1,000 things that can go wrong here, but less things can go wrong here. At the end of the day, though, still the one limiting factor here is excursion. It has to be physics to get the excursion. However, what they have learned is that most music and most people's perception of bass, people think they know what 20 hertz sounds like. Go ahead and play a 20 hertz tone. It doesn't really, it's not the part of bass that's guttural and visceral that people typically think of as bass. And it's not even a part of many songs. It's important, no doubt about it. However, if what they did was realized, and going back to their background, they have repaired electrostatics for over 20 plus years. Sound Labs, Martin Logan's, Fennel, whatever, you name it. They learned what the trade-offs were, quads. And what they learned, and that's something I've learned, even for these type speakers, if you have a low frequency compromised speaker, do not send it information, frequencies that it's not good at doing. Don't let the driver itself roll things off at the bottom. I don't know why people feel like it's okay or even preferable to roll off their mid-range top and bottom to hand off to the tweeter and the woofer, but then they say, okay, we're not going to worry about the woofer, we'll just let it roll off on its own. No, why make it do something or try to make it do something it doesn't want to do? And that's what initially gave these guys, when I started to have Zooms with them, get to know them, because like I kind of intimated early on, that's part of the equation. I have to get to know the people behind it and their acumen. When they told me they have their own formula for making sure, and it's done mechanically, not even with crossover, to make sure these drivers never see frequencies that will make it slap and cause the problem. It will just roll it off much more linearly, less distortion, without that slap and the problem that almost all electrostatics have if they don't create a separate pistonic driver. And that impressed me, because I thought that even these type of speakers need that as well. Rumble filters are kind of the quasi example for turntables, same thing. Having these drivers do a lot of stuff that you can't hear and creates only distortion and takes power from your amps. It's just a separate topic for a separate day. But the same thing that they're doing with electrostatics, I think many speakers of this ilk should be doing it as well. Really impressed me, and it proved itself. There are physics still, and what they do is on their website is they calculate, okay, this speaker of this size, physics-wise, and what we decide is the roll-off point that we're going to let it play to frequency, what is the max SPL you can get? And they give that to you on the website. So you can determine, Popori, you can determine what one will suit your taste. If you play over 100 dB SPLs, then you're going to probably need one of their bigger models. If you are in a smaller room, you don't play super loud, you value your hearing like most of us do, you can get away with almost the same quality of performance at their lower models as you get at the higher models. And that's another thing that attracted me to Popori, because the drop off from their very top models to the lower models is not as drastic as some companies that have diamond, bunch of drivers, better cabinet, and then their budget models are a severe compromise of that. Not much can trickle down. Here, almost everything trickles down except the physics part of what kind of dynamics, panel size, and SPL you can get. And then when you add a sub and fill in that gap, which many people have done that have bought the lower models like the WR3. You've seen that on my channel. Dave Husto has that. Dennis, I've shown you that. Not Dennis, I'm sorry. I've shown you Van in Carolina with the WR1s. I've shown you Doug with the WR2s. One of the things I wanted to do before I did my own review was show you all the other people enjoying it and third-party validation. They put their money where their mouth was, and they are giving you honest feedback. No, they're not getting paid anything at all. They're just normal audiophiles. So even if you don't believe me, I wanted to give you all of those from the different models. You don't have to buy the Vitorlas. However, here's where the fun part comes in. The Vitorlas are a step up in almost every respect to all the models. I've heard them all now. And on their own, you could do them without subs. But when you add subs as well to these, you really don't have that compromise in terms of bass. Now, if you're going to play 115 mega concert levels, yes, you probably should go with, pro audio drivers. Because a lot of these high-end companies that create Pistonic and cost no object designs, they still are not built for the excursion, especially their bass drivers. If they're not using like pro audio drivers, or it's not a horn-based system, you're either going to run out of power, or the drivers themselves don't have the excursion to give you. So it's no guarantee just because you have a Pistonic driver speaker that you can get better bass and more bass. In terms of better bass, there's almost no comparison at all. The pitch definition, the detail, the speed now of electrostatic doing most of the bass all the way down to, in most cases, 40 hertz with a model like this or lower. It's just so pitch definition accurate. Now, if you just listen to rap music, maybe you're not going to notice so much. But when you listen to actual instruments, bass guitars, bass, standing bass, anything with low frequency information, all the detail and accuracy, it no longer sounds like speaker bass. And again, that's one of the trade-offs that I still think box speaker makers still haven't quite gotten to the level, and that's why this is in my room and no other box speaker is in my room, because one of the things that even among the very best that they can't seem to totally get rid of, that is a big bugaboo for me, is bass that sounds like speaker bass. And what do I mean by speaker bass? How can I describe that? Well, number one, if there's a port, I can almost hear it all the time. You can sense it, okay? There's a lot of air, especially when you're playing it loud, coming out of it. You put a curtain behind some of these speakers, it'll blow the curtain worse than a blow dryer. That can be sensed in the room, and it's one note. And then all the frequencies below the port tuning frequency, good luck with that being accurate, distortionless, and linear. And then the box, as good as some of these box makers have made it, you still sense that box coloration of that driver and all the violent sound that is inside the cabinet leaks out. If you go behind a box speaker and listen, you will hear muddiness. And if you think that that's muddiness behind the speaker doesn't eventually reflect and get to you, yeah, maybe not in a gated measurement that you're taking, but you will eventually sense that. And for me, it's a problem. It's because once you hear accurate bass so well done, so well with a driver, the thinness of a human hair, so fast and accurate, you kind of can't go back. When you go to a no cabinet, you just can't go back in that one area. There are some, and like I was talking about, the Estelons, they sound just like open baffles in many respects. So there are, like I've been showing you, some cost no object speakers that are very close in that bass area to almost sounding cabinetless. But for me, this is still my favorite. Line sources, despite all the trade-offs, despite the limitations, despite one driver being better with no crossover, but it's not going to be linear at every frequency. I think you should use DSP with any kind of electrostatic or planar one driver type, but there are great trade-offs now that, well, fixes for the trade-offs for almost any speaker type you choose. So this is about featuring this speaker this time. There's tons of others that I featured that may resonate with you. And let's face it, when we're spending the kind of money we're spending, this is like a $100,000 speaker, just under that, I think. Although, let's go ahead and talk about this. I'm the only one that has this. And the history behind it is, I talked about the Seattle Audio Fest and I kind of got on a tangent. What ended up happening after that is that I started going on that year of looking for speakers that were electrostatics, and none of them passed my test. They all had the bass issue, and that's how I got off on that tangent. However, Mike Sweck reminded me of these that I had heard 2 years before. And then when I went to Munich 2 years ago, I was going to the Metaxas to go listen to their bigger electrostatic, because that was one I was very close to buying. In fact, I flew all the way to Miami to hear it and put it through the paces. Unfortunately, the prints didn't work out. It didn't pass my test, but they did have bigger models. So I was walking to them in Munich, and a guy grabbed me out the hall, and that was right across and it was the Popori guys. But at the time, I couldn't even see the brand. I wasn't even paying attention. He just dragged me in there and said, "You got to hear these." And it was Popori in hindsight. And then when I was leaving, he gave me a card that had a mock-up, not the actual, they had not developed this yet. I thought they had. When I saw it, I was like, that's so awesome. Who bought that? That is the best looking speaker I've ever seen. And I must have misunderstood him, because I thought he said they already made it, but they didn't. And so when Mike Sweck was looking as well, he was a Sound Lab dealer, and Sound Labs just didn't quite do what he heard me say these did. He decided to take the risk and try the Poporis. Super impressed himself. He became the new distributor for US, and him and I already had a good relationship. He's a Bach dealer. Technically, he's a competitor for me on that, but we've worked together, and I was like, yeah, let me get to know him as well now that you're the distributor. So I got to be on the Zooms with them, learn the background, learn the people behind it, getting more and more comfort with the people behind this brand. Although one reason I haven't done a Zoom with them yet is because they do not speak Gabriel doesn't speak English, so we have to have a translator on there. So it's not really conducive to a good video interview right now. However, I'm going to Warsaw, and one reason I'm trying to get this video out, the production model of this is now ready. They gave this to me as a prototype to kind of evaluate and give them feedback. And really, I had nothing on feedback in terms of sound quality. It's just phenomenal. What I was telling them for the final model is maybe having some ability to change out with magnets or Velcro the Corian outer shell. Because if you haven't heard, these are all aluminum inner shell, which is one of the best consistent, strong material, easy to fabricate and make any shape for ideal purposes for performance. But they put a Corian outer shell, which gives them the ability to choose almost any color like you would choose for countertops. And what I asked them to do is maybe do a little bit to make it where people can even change it out with Velcro or magnet structure. So they were working on that. Sound-wise, I really haven't had anything to complain about other than, yeah, if they can get even more excursion without making it much bigger, that's great. But I roll it off to subs to even get, subterranean bass, and that's perfect for me. And I use DSP to correct anything at the listening position. But they did something I didn't even ask when they're ready for the production model. They're going to be debuting the final production model in Warsaw. I will be in Warsaw hearing it myself, the full production model. But really, I want to see it. I've already heard what it's going to sound like, but I'm going to see what they added. And they added a incredible lighting scheme to the actual speaker. And again, that could be very touchy in terms of going too much and go cheesy. That's one thing I've noticed with them, at least from my taste. Everything they do aesthetically wise is just like what they do on the performance side. It resonates with me and tons of other people. This is an electrostatic you can be proud of. It's not a big panel taken up, like a wall divider. This is beautiful. It's a piece of art. When you're paying the money that you're paying for these, that's 100% sometimes the highest priority. We're not going to buy something that's going to be in our home we don't like, that isn't cool, that isn't, aesthetically pleasing to us. It's not worth spending that money, even if the performance is there. Here, you're getting both. If this style resonates with you, wait till you see some of the different colors, options, and interchangeability, and this lighting thing in Warsaw. I don't want to tip off too much of that, but I did want to give you my general review. I also have shown in the past measurements at my listening position, but what I'll probably do is add on to this video, because I don't have it handy right now, the measurements I'm getting with this speaker at the listening position, so you can see that. But like I said, it'll all depend on each person's room, how much DSP you're using. If you have the Bach, almost everybody that's bought this happens to also have a Bach, so you're going to get incredible results at your listening position. And more importantly, what people find, and you've heard it from Dave Husto and others, the impulse response, because of the lack of reflections off the side wall, the ceiling, you get so much purity, less hearing the room, more hearing the speakers, more hearing the gear, more hearing the quality of your electronics. It's a true reference speaker with very minor trade-offs overall that can easily be overcome with the right other tools. So again, plenty of cost no object speakers out there, plenty of them that may be right for you, but I think you might want to add this to your list. And I am a dealer to qualify this for this. I became a customer first, but I'm a dealer now for it, and I'm the only one in the country dealer for this model. All the other models as well, I can get you, and Mike Sweat can get you. They're going to be at different shows. I think these will be at both Warsaw and Capital Audio Fest. At the New York show, there will be Poporis. And then I have a network of people that I know, and you've seen on my channel, that have the WR1s, WR2s, WR3s. If you are interested, because there are a growing number of dealers. That's the other thing. They're not afraid of measurements. They're not afraid of having their speaker in dealers. They're not afraid of competing at shows against other things. This is a company that 100% I can get behind, and they're definitely growing and impressing me. So, but if you're interested, because there aren't as many dealers right now, let me know and I can hook you up with somebody around the country that may be near you to hear it. You fly out to see me. I just had somebody fly out from Utah. One flew from Thailand. One bought this and almost everything. He's already the first order of the production model. So I'll have a video with him soon to show you another person's impression. But come back here anytime if you're in Houston, take a listen. Go to Warsaw, see me, hear these, and also Capital Audio Fest. Hope you enjoy, guys, and I'll see you back here soon.